Hi, Jim here, just dropping in before this week's episode to tell you about my latest movie, The Apocalypse Box. It's a horror film and I'd love for you to check it out. If you go to apocalypsebox.co.uk, you can find all the links on where you can watch the movie. Right, let's get on with this week's episode. Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. This week I'm speaking to director Joshua Caldwell. After making a bunch of short films, Joshua went on to make the feature film Layover, which then went on to win some awards and launch his directing career. Joshua's directed television and a bunch of feature films, including Mending starring Brian Cox. Joshua also runs the 6K Filmmaker Micro Budget Course, one of the students of which was James Chick, who I interviewed a month ago for Feet of Death. I talked to Joshua about his career, how he started out, how he got that first feature film put together. He also told me about why he thinks it's much better to make a feature film than lots and lots of short films and the reasons why. We also talked about some of his course, some of the things you'll find on his course that might be useful if you're thinking of making your first micro-budget feature film. And we talked a bit about Mending the Line, the feature film he made recently with Brian Cox. Enjoy. Right, let's start where I start with most people, which is tell me a bit about how you got into the business. Where did you start?
So it started from a young age. Always had an interest in movies, going to see movies. My dad, would take me to the theater and saw a bunch of different things. And, a lot of the typical stuff in the 80s, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman, Indiana Jones, things like that, especially with like the advent of VHS at that time, got to see a lot of stuff at home. And I would, after seeing a movie, I would like act it out. I would want to be Robin Hood. I would want to be Batman. I would, I could think of myself after seeing Newsies running and jumping off a ledge saying New York, New York, like, but it wasn't really like an attraction to acting. It was more so wanting to sort of exist in the world and be that character as opposed to be an actor. So that was always kind of there. And then what really got me into sort of the idea of even making movies was I saw a show on Discovery Channel called Movie Magic. And it was this, I don't know how long it was on for, but it was also during it was in the late 90s, mid 90s. So like you had to catch it, on Discovery Channel. And it was all basically how they did all the special effects on movies. So each episode was about, different things, prosthetics, model building, animatronics. And they would go behind the scenes of Terminator 2 and Apollo 13 and Jurassic Park and show you how all this stuff was made and how they did it for the movies. And that's what kind of piqued my interest. It made me say, oh, that's a really cool thing, is doing all this kind of like cool special effect, blowing stuff up, and it really just kind of grew from there. And I had a opportunity in high school. We had a 2-period a day video production class. And so I got to sort of, take this class and learn all about making movies and making news docs and documentary and music videos and whatever, and shooting on digital cameras and editing on Avid systems, nonlinear Avid systems, and sort of learning that process. But beyond that, right, because that's great, but who's watching your movies? Our school had this really cool tradition of basically making parody films that they would show to the entire school. And so, I came into high school and I saw some of these movies being played in front of the entire school. And I very quickly learned that a very good friend of mine who was a year older than I was the one responsible for making them. And I said, I just want to help out, whatever, I'll do whatever. And so that slowly became me helping out, and then me directing, and then me becoming an ASB, a student body officer myself, and making these movies and screening these movies in front of 1,200 kids. And so that really solidified for me. It was in high school, really solidified that, oh, this is really what I want to do. And then everything else became about pursuing that.
Yeah. Nice. And it's funny you talk about catching something, Movie Magic. I think I know the program you're talking about, but I remember from that period it being so, compared to now, so hard to even see any behind the scenes, let alone even a trailer. You'd be lucky if you caught it in an ad break for Batman or something. And when you did, you'd be like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then it'd be gone. So it was a real drought of information, not like today. So did you go to university? Did you study film at college? What happened next?
Well, the big change in terms of accessing that information was kind of at the beginning of, for me, around the beginning of high school, which was 97, 98. DVDs came out. And the DVDs, people don't understand. Like the DVDs that they put out today are worthless, like other than just the movie. But they were so new, and the idea that you could put so much content on these things, you were getting 2-disc releases of every movie that came out, and they all had tons of behind the scenes content. So for the first time, yeah, like, I mean, I remember watching behind the scenes of Magnolia and seeing a Fisher dolly and being like, what is that thing? Like, what's all the knobs and the handles? Like, what is that used for? Right. Like having no concept of really what this stuff was and how it was. But so was studying a lot of that and listening to the commentaries. And I knew that I had, the idea was, the big question became, do I go to film school or not go to film school? I applied to a couple film schools that were at the time more prestigious in nature, didn't get in. And I had also, on a recommendation of a college counselor, I'd applied for a school in New York City, not NYU, a different one. And I ended up getting in. And I kind of sat down and thought about it. I'd gotten into Chapman University down in Orange County. And I just said, I want to direct and I want to write. I want to be a storyteller. And I got to say, living for 4 years in New York City is probably going to benefit me a lot more than living for 4 years in Orange County, New York, California. The diversity and the experience. I mean, the Fordham University was really cool. It's on the Upper West Side, West 60th in Columbus. I mean, you are in the middle of it, and turned out to be a really great decision for me. Beyond sort of the fact that New York is still very much a film, hub. I, without knowing this, ended up, Fordham has a really fantastic acting program. And so while I didn't get the sort of like film school experience, I basically said, I'm going to go make films. I'm going to write, I'm going to make films for as little as possible. And I was able to tap into all this really, really fantastic talent that was at Fordham. And later went on to do some really cool things. Taylor Schilling from Orange is the New Black is in my class. Michaela McManus was in a film that I made. She was on Law and Order and One Tree Hill and all these other shows. And so, that was the real benefit, was I had, the ability to go make things for no money. I own my own camera. I got people to help out, but I had really, really great actors that I could utilize and put in my films and hopefully turn out something better than what you might expect. But I also knew, when I was weighing the pros and cons of film school, I felt that, like, at least, I don't know if things have changed, but at the time, the idea was you spend your first 2 years making 1 minute long, shorts on 8mm film. And then your junior year, you make a 10-minute, color sync Super 16 movie. And then your senior year, you maybe get to make your 35mm thesis. Right. And sort of, at this time, because of the DVDs, Robert Rodriguez was coming out with his like 10-minute film school that was on the extras of El Mariachi and Desperado. And, he said, look, everybody's got bad movies in them, and it's really good to try and get them out as quickly as possible and learn from them. And I just felt, you could go to film school and you could spend all this time and all this money, and you can make some really not great movies that are supposed to be your calling card. And instead, I said, rather than limiting myself and only doing these, 1-2 films that have any value, I'm going to just make as many as possible. I'm going to make as many as I can. Some are going to not even get finished. Some are going to be good. Some are going to maybe turn into something. But at the very least, I'm going to just try and make as many things as I can and just gain a ton of experience. So that's what I really set out to do in college. And I think I made like four, 5 or 6 movies at the end of the day. And it was one of those movies that ended up actually turning into something, which we can get to in a minute.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I'd say something, whenever I speak to students, I'm like, while you're at university, you're in a protective bubble, you've got all that equipment available to you, you've got expertise, you should be filming every weekend, you should be making films the whole time you're there, because as soon as you leave, you're in the real world. You've obviously got to pay the bills while you do that, which is incredibly taxing on your time. So definitely make as many films as you can while you're at uni.
Well, I think that that's where, my opinion on film school is that my personal belief is if you want to be a writer, you want to be a director, don't go to film school. Go do
Mm.
something else. The actual technical aspects of directing and writing can be learned extremely quickly and probably
Mm.
in a better way than in school. However, if you want to be like a DP or an editor, film school can be a really great place for you because you're going to be around all these other people that want to direct. They're all going to be coming up with the money or funding these movies themselves, and they're all going to need somebody to shoot it. So you look at guys like Janusz Kaminski, that's what he did. He shot like 40 student films when he was at AFI because everybody wanted him to shoot his stuff. And he got tons of experience on somebody else's dime, right? Shooting on all these different formats, all these different types of movies. But it can be really difficult to get a lot of benefit out of film school if you want to be a writer director. Obviously, there's camaraderie. There's meeting a lot of people. You can do that in other ways. I think that I find film school to be a very, very expensive endeavor that is very rarely ever worth the money, I think, especially in this day and age. So much is accessible on YouTube, online courses, just getting a camera and going and do it yourself. Like, the idea of a film school, it's almost bordering on obsolescence, in my opinion.
Right.
And I think that they're largely taking advantage of people's hopes and dreams rather than actually providing them with a realistic education about how you make movies, and, they don't really set themselves up for success. I remember talking to people and saying, oh, does it really make a difference if you went to USC? And they were like, well, half this industry's gone to USC. So not really, like it doesn't make you special. Like, and at the end of the day, unlike going to a university for like finance or for business or for engineering or like sciences or something like that, where like the people hiring you are looking at that education that you got, nobody cares that you went to film school. You don't put it on a resume. You don't put it in your pitch deck, and it is not going to get you a job as a director. What's going to get you a job as director is directing. Now, film school can provide a place to go and fail and try things, and that can be good. You can also do that on your own. I don't know if you need to spend 50 grand a year to do that. So, it's always a question as to whether anybody's, whether you're going to benefit from it. And, I think that there's often other avenues to go down that I think I'd rather you take the 200 grand that you would spend at film school and make a movie or make a couple. You hear every director say that. Every director says that like your real film school is making a film.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. When I left university, I learned more making my first feature than I did in those 3 years. But I guess the difference between probably when we went and now is there's so many more film courses. So there's a lot more people leaving those institutions with a degree in film or whatever.
Yep.
So like you say, maybe it's not worth as much as it was back then.
It's very diluted, and at the end of the day, again, nobody's going to hire you because you went to a film school. They're going to, maybe that gets you an internship or a PA job, but that's not what you want to do as direct. That there's no straight line from film school to directing. And, the only way to really get there is to make a movie.
So with that in mind, thinking about you went out and made all these films. How'd you fund them? Where'd you get the money for? How'd you put them together?
For like the college stuff?
Yeah.
I'd make them for $1,000. I'd try and get some, I'd use some of the spending money that I would have as a part of going to college. And I would fund, I would pay for some food, I'd get free crew. I own the camera. Maybe I would rent some equipment, and rent a couple of lights and whatever, but largely it was spending as little as possible. And trying to just get away with whatever I could get away with. Right. And so, yeah, you don't pay your crew, but you're in college, right? Like, hey, come out for a weekend or for a day. I'm not asking you to work for 2 weeks for nothing. So I actually got a lot of people because at that stage, there's a lot of people that are willing. You're trying to, DPs need a shot, like gaffers want a shot, camera assistants want shots. They're willing to sort of do that, especially if you're all in the same boat. And so, I don't do that anymore, but at the time, that's how I put those together, and I would spend time writing them and trying to come up with them, and I would cast them out of the school. Sometimes I would look for elsewhere if I needed, like, say, an older actor. But the goal was really just make them for, as pennies, essentially.
Yeah.
And because I didn't have a lot of money to spend.
Yeah. And when I was doing my research on you, an article popped up, which some people aren't going to like, which the title for which was "Short Films Are a Giant Waste of Your Time and Money." So talk me through that, if you can.
So first of all, people like to respond to the article title, which is admittedly clickbaity, but gets people reading. If you read the article, you'll understand my position, which is that the reason why I wrote that was I know personally and have seen a lot of people who are at a certain stage of their career who will continue to make short films. And they're not necessarily making them like because they just want to make shorts, right? They're making them because they think that that short is going to get them to that next step. And my whole point about writing that is that after a certain amount of time and at a certain point in your career, making shorts is just increasingly diminishing returns. Very few to almost none get jobs off of shorts. I mean, maybe you could say, oh, I ended up getting a meeting and then that turned into a thing, but there are very, very few examples, and they're always the exception, right? You can point to Lights Out, you can point to all these other short films, but there are very clear exceptions. They're very clear exceptions because you also got to say, well, what about the hundreds of thousands, well, tens of thousands a year plus into hundreds of thousands, over several years that get made that nobody ever hears about, nobody ever sees. And so, really what I'm trying to get at, and part of writing the article was to say, look, when you're starting out, shorts are a great way to learn, right? They're low risk. It's really great to learn how to tell a story. But at some point, I think that you are better off taking the money that you would have normally spent on a short and instead making a micro budget feature. From my own personal experience, I sunk a lot of money into I'd done the shorts in college, got out of college. We're skipping over it, but I ended up, one of those films ended up winning me an MTV Movie Award, which was really cool, except nobody cared about it. And so it's a fun story now, but nobody really cares. And at the time, nobody cared either. It didn't turn into anything. But I knew that I needed to make sort of a real professional short. Like at the time, that was the thinking. I made a bunch of stuff in college. They're rough. They don't have name actors in it. Like, I need to make something that is compelling, that is really strong. And so I made this movie called Dig. It's a 26-minute short. Stories about a young Holocaust survivor who has 20 years later has made his way to LA, and he sees the Nazi that was responsible for killing his family. And he takes him out to the desert and orders him at gunpoint to dig his own grave. Really, really great, compelling sort of morality tale. And I was like, I'm going to do this right. I'd spent $1,000 on those other shorts. I'm going to spend tens of thousands of dollars on this one. I'm going to make sure that, it was period, took place in the 60s. So I had all the wardrobe, the cars, right? Like, I got actors. I had Mark Margolis, who was in, Pi, and Hector from in Breaking Bad, and Aaron Himmelstein, who was a great young actor, who's been in like Transformers movies, things like that. And I put a lot of money into it. Even at the time, I was working for the creator of CSI, so I was able to utilize that connection to get a lot of favors. But even with a lot of favors, I still spent $40,000 to make that short. And I still think it's one of my best pieces. It's really, really strong. I couldn't be more thrilled with how it ended up turning out. It did absolutely zero for my career. Played in a couple festivals, didn't turn into anything. It was hampered by the fact that it was 26 minutes. So I admit that. But I'm not a, joke punchline storyteller. Like, it's not, I couldn't figure out how to do something in 5 minutes. It's just not in my nature. I want to make features. I want to make long form stories, tell long form stories that take time to develop and take time to sort of execute. Right. And so, but it didn't do anything for me. It was really strong. Didn't do anything for me. Then, again, skipping ahead a little bit, but then I go and make a feature film for $6,000 with no name actors in it. That's almost entirely in French. And it launches my career and completely changes things for me. So I just think what I experienced out of that was shorts. And it was also at this time when I made this film, you had a lot of these shorts that I highlight in the article. You have shorts like The Raven and these, these short 5-minute special effects driven things that were all getting bought up and purchased. And none of that stuff ever turned into anything. I think some filmmakers years later ended up getting to make something else, but those movies never got made. There was all this splashy noise about it. And I just said, the problem was, anybody can make a 5-minute short, but trying to then make, a long form 2-hour movie that is also, because of the way they set those shorts up, is also, very special effects driven and is likely to cost $100 million. They kind of go, why, we're not going to give it to this guy who's never done anything. So part of it is just proving your mettle and proving that you can tell a story. And even if it's like done for $6,000, proving that you can, sustain a story over an hour and a half is very meaningful to people that are looking for you to do it again. It's much harder for people to see how a short translates into feature work than it is to see how a low budget, no budget feature translates into feature work. And I think you can look around and see a lot more examples of low budget features turning into work than you can shorts. Even if you don't hear about them as often. But yeah, I think shorts can be great. I think they're a great learning experience, but at some point, continuing to make shorts in the hopes that is going to launch your career, I think ends up being a waste of your time and a waste of your money. You want to go make shorts and continue to make shorts, fine. Nothing wrong with that. But, I believe that if you want to be, trying to meet where expectations and reality, right? So like, if you want to be a feature filmmaker and make a career out of this, I think you're better taking the resources that you would normally put into a short and instead put that into a feature. And, I show people how that's possible using Layover as an example.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the other thing that doing a feature film teaches you is that missing bit they never teach you at film school, which is the sales and distribution. It's how all of that works and packaging something up and getting people to actually watch it. Which, like you say, there's not as many avenues to put a short film out on and get eyes on it. And with the way festivals are these days, that's all a game anyway. So it's kind of
it's a huge game. It's I also think that like now, and I say this in the article, most people's time and attention is so divided. And people are already putting out shorts on YouTube and on, little like social media stuff. And that's what people are watching, so the attention span is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Right. And then you're trying to get them to watch a short and sit down and watch. And, it takes a short to really just hit the right notes, at the right time. Like, I'm sure you've been seeing this float around, but a buddy of mine, Luke Barnett, just released his short, and The Crossing Over Express. And it was like a short of the week on Vimeo. And it's just absolutely blown up. Absolutely blown up. Is it going to turn into a feature? I don't know. We'll see. But like, and all that can be also really great when you're like, this is awesome. Everybody's watching this. People are calling for meetings. You do the water bottle tour and then nothing really comes of it, because there may not be sort of serious and intentional about actually hiring you to do anything, especially nowadays. It's so much tougher, with Hollywood and the state that it's in.
Yeah. And so you do this course, which we should talk about. So you do your micro budget film course. How do we do that? Is it online? Is it in person? How long does it take? Give me the details.
I had done this little movie called Layover, for $6,000, shooting with me and a couple of buddies and some actors I knew, on a Canon 5D and very guerrilla style. And, again, took the idea that instead of doing the thing that people typically do, which is limiting your actors and limiting your locations, we went the opposite direction. We shot in as many locations as we could. We were on airplanes, in airports, in hotels, and on, motorcycles, at houses, at parties, and clubs. Like, we were everywhere. And, and so instead of having very few locations and very few actors and a bunch of crew behind the scenes, which never makes it up on screen, we flipped it. We had a ton of locations, we had tons of actors, and we had a crew of 4 people, most of the time. Sometimes it was just me. And so I just, as courses became popular and I was thinking about, ways of sort of, alternate revenue streams and things like that, as I'm trying to stay busy, I thought, hey, what about a course on how you make a movie for no money? Because I didn't see any out there. And I just thought that, being able to utilize Layover as a success story along with some other projects, because it's not like, oh, I made Layover and then it made a ton of money and that was it. Like Layover hardly made any money, but it got me my next movie, which then got me my next movie, which then got me my next movie, and budgets kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So sort of a, proof of concept here. So this course is called 6K Filmmaker. And the idea behind it is you take it online, and then sort of me using both Layover and Negative, which was my $100,000 feature, as sort of a proof that it is possible to do that in this way and make a movie that feels much bigger, in scale than you might think you would be able to get with only $6,000. Some of that is some principles, built around, say, like the 80-20 rule, right? So like with both, with a movie like Negative, where we had $100,000 budget, which is still not a lot, I would say that 80% of that budget went into 20% of that film. And the other 20% went into 80% of the movie, So, for 80% of that film, it was me and one other person on set with the actors. And then we would take, for the shootouts or for any big scenes that were nighttime and had to be lit, we'd hire people on, but we would only hire them for that weekend. So we're not hiring crew for 35 days, we're hiring crew for 3 days. But even starting from the beginning, even from your basic idea, what is your idea? Who is the character? Like, how do you approach, start with that, in terms of how you're then building out the rest of this world and the rest of the experience the audience is going to have, writing in the things that you have access to, and being very generic in what you're listing. So it's a concept I call modular storytelling. Modular storytelling is the idea that if you, to boil it down, if you have like a scene, you should be able to write the scene. The scene should be written so that you could almost stage it anywhere, within reason, right? But if you're very specific about where it has to happen and what the background looks like and what the house looks like, that locks you in a way that you can't really just be malleable with, right? Like if you write, I wrote in Layover, there's a house party. I didn't write into the script. It doesn't matter what the house was. The house was whatever house we could get, right? And I actually wrote that the party, I didn't create like an environment where you have characters saying, man, this is quite a party, isn't it? Like there's so many people here. And then you have 5 people in the background, right? Like that aspect of it was irrelevant. We didn't talk about it. In fact, like when I knew there were only like a handful of people, we were only going to get maybe like 10, 12 people, we actually tweaked the script on the day to be like, yeah, it's kind of like a weird low key party. Like, it's like we were familiar enough with the story and with what was going on that we could make those changes to adapt to whatever the production was throwing at us. Another concept is live environment shooting. So like, shooting in spaces without permits, without control, and utilizing that in an effective way to build a much bigger world than you might normally think you could.
Amazing. It sounds like something I could have done with 20 years ago. You put on Instagram this cool the sequence, the chase sequence where you show the chase sequence and then you show, is it you who's actually shooting in the back? Yeah, you're in the back.
So I was operating.
Definitely look it up. I'll put links to the course and to that in the description to this, but you actually see that entire thing play out. So talking of doing a one shot, everything in it, tips for that, what would be your tips?
Yeah, so Infamous actually has a lot of oneers. And I had done, so I don't know why I suddenly clued into the notion of a oneer. All of a sudden it sort of popped in my head as like, oh, it's something I want to do. And I was doing I remember I was doing a series, this is before I did Infamous. I was doing a series with Joe Penna, called a Release, which was about a pandemic, funny enough, that we shot before the pandemic. And there were these short 10, 12-minute episodes. And I remember, thinking we were doing, one of these episodes was about a break-in that goes wrong. So these 2 guys break into a house, they're stealing something. And then all of a sudden the homeowners come home because there's been this like, alert. Oh, please get to your homes, seal your doors, right? So then they get to the house and now these guys are stuck in this house. and there's sort of confrontation, all that kind of stuff. And I remember thinking like, oh, it'd be cool. We should do some of this as a oneer. We should do some of these scenes as a oneer. I became very interested in the idea of like sustaining things for as long as I could, even if it was just still, but letting the shot run, right? And thinking a lot more about staging and blocking and all that kind of stuff. But there was this point where I know Joe came to me and said, listen, he had been shooting other episodes. He said, listen, there's, I don't know, I know there's a lot of fighting in your episode, and you got like 16 pages you got to get through in 2 days. The fighting took forever on my thing, and we barely did anything. So just a heads up. And I was like, okay, great. And I was like, well, maybe we need to do this as a oneer. And the beauty of the reason why I thought this could work is the beauty of the oneer is when you enter a oneer, the audience clues into that. And they recognize subconsciously that they're not going to see everything because you're in a oneer, right? And, looking at the oneers, even though they're not real oneers, but looking at great oneers like in The Revenant, right? That opening scene where it's like, moving, you're not seeing everything. You're not giving multiple, angles on the same piece of action. You're only limited to what you're seeing in front of you. The author is taking you on a ride, right? And so I said, well, that may save us because this fight scene had like a scuffle, a stabbing, and when you're not in a oneer, when you're in traditional coverage, if you don't show somebody get stabbed, the audience is going to go, why didn't you show that? It's weird that you didn't show that. Meanwhile, if you're in a oneer and you panned off the action to go find somebody over here, and then you see her look up and you hear the stabbing and she screams and she turns and you come back and he's bleeding out, the audience just goes along with it. They just accept it a little bit more. So it was a cheat. It was a way of not having to show complicated effects in action, in a way that like kind of hid the fact that we just had no time. And then it became, because we had 16 pages to get through, it became, maybe we should just do as much of this as a oneer as we could. So then it became this, how long can we go? So all of this made me go, hey, this was really great. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed the process of it. I enjoyed how the whole crew gets into it. I enjoy the fact that we can spend, a couple hours rehearsing and then we shoot 5 takes and we're done. That's it. We don't have to do it. Now we got to do 5 more of this other angle and then 5 more of this angle and 5 more of this angle. And it was just so enjoyable. So that when I started thinking about Infamous, I was like, I think that this would be cool to do for some of these things, but I also wanted to have a reason. And if you've seen Infamous is basically modern day Bonnie and Clyde with social media. So they're getting, instead of Bonnie and Clyde getting famous because of newspapers, Ariel and Dean are getting famous because of social media, which is something I truly believe has already happened and happens, and people getting famous for really heinous stuff. And so, I thought this would be an interesting sort of expose on the world of social media, where I think it's going, what it's turning into, and the fact that I'm shocked that this hasn't already happened, But the way the oneers fit in was I wanted to also make the film in sort of something that would psychologically lean into the social media aspects of it. So from a color perspective, it's very poppy and bright pink and bright green and bright colors, and very much like an Instagram filter, where it really brought those colors up, big saturation, that kind of thing. But then also with the oneers, it was leaning into sort of the whole vlogging world of it all, right? Where like when you got vloggers or you got people live streaming Instagram, you don't have multiple angles. You have that one angle. And so I wanted the oneers to feel like it was somebody was there live streaming. And so that's sort of the reason why we approached that the way we did. And then when we were doing it, it was just like so much fun. Like it was like such a blast because again, crew gets really into it. In the case of that car scene, yeah, it was like originally as scripted, that car scene was at night, and had, was going to be shot traditionally. Right. And so then we're going through it and we're going, because I hadn't really decided where a oneer was going to be. I knew an earlier robbery was going to be a oneer, but I wasn't thinking that this scene was going to be a oneer. And my DP was like, listen, I don't think we should do this at night. And I was like, okay, like that's fine. I was like, we can have the robbery that precedes it be at night, and then she gets home and it's more dawn, and then it's like into daytime. So, well, that's fine. And then I started thinking about, I was like, what'd be cool if we just did this whole thing as a oneer instead of shooting it traditionally. Because like, think about it. Like if you're going to see the cars get shot up, you got to do all that. We're not going to have multiple cop cars, so you're going to have to do VFX, and is it going to look good? You burn a lot trying to get, coverage of action scenes. And I said, with the oneer, we can we'll see some of it, but we're not going to have to go overboard with it. And so everybody kind of bought into it. And then it was just a process of like on the day, as we did with every other oneer, just slowly building. So like we actually allotted one day of our 19-day schedule just for that scene. And we ended up basically only spending 3/4 of a day doing it. So we spent basically everything up till lunch was all rehearsal. So we started with mini cars, like on the ground, like toy cars, and saying this is what's going to happen. And then getting Jake familiar with driving that car, because it was a terrible car and had no steering and brakes were shoddy. And, and then we brought in, doing it 20 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour, right? Every pass, like a little bit more. And then, putting Bella in the back and mimicking the action. And then, okay, now let's bring in the cop cars and like mimic that. And then I think we ended up getting up to like 50 miles an hour. And then knowing that, okay, then we have this whole long conversation that happens after the shootout. So it's just a process of building it up. And I think the take that's in the movie is either number 7 or number 9. I don't remember which, but we did 9 takes. And I think that only 3 of them ended up really being usable because of whatever reason. But it was a lot of fun.
It looks like a lot of fun to shoot. And technically, just thinking about that, did you have somebody pulling focus for you, or were you doing that?
So So I'm holding it sort of with a 2-handled grip, right? Like we stripped the camera down as much as we could. I've got a 2-handled grip on it. In the behind the scenes video, you see Jake driving, Bella behind him, then me, and then a guy in the front with a big forehead.
Oh, he's focus pulling.
He's pulling focus. So that was really because, in fact, even with our DP, who was Eve, like she, once we left a certain distance, they lost picture. So we had to watch it on playback, and I had to sort of know, did we get it? Did we not get it? But yeah, no, I mean, that was basically, we had to, and even with sound, we had to basically hit record, put it in the trunk, and then hope we ended up getting it. We had to do a little ADR in that scene, but so Jeff was basically the guy. He was the guy in the front pulling focus,
concentrating on not screwing that up.
Because that was the one thing that I didn't want to do that. Like I could have, but like I didn't want to have to be worrying about the focus and thinking about the framing and all that kind of stuff. It was much easier to just tell Jeff to scoot down and stay out of the shot, and you focus only on that, and then I'll do the rest.
And then the other thing I was thinking when I was watching it was, I'm assuming those were all post gun flashes, or were they not?
That's a good question. I mean, they were definitely accentuated. I don't know if we saw.
Because I could see a bit of recoil, and I was thinking.
So they were blank fire weapons. Those were actual blank fire weapons. They weren't airsoft or fake. They were actually blank fire, which is every gun in the movie is blank fire. Mainly because, obviously now with the accident that occurred on Rust and things like that, things have shifted a little bit. And I've used airsoft before, but this was my first big movie, and I was like, I want to do blank fire. But I really wanted. It was important to me that like the actors have the effect of shooting, because especially during this kind of stuff, trying to like make it feel like it's it's too much for them to think about. I wanted to remove that. I wanted them just to be reacting to the actual thing. And so, we did actually live fire training with them in Oklahoma ahead of the shoot. I had a couple special forces guys that I've worked with who came out, and we put the 3 of them on the range, including the guy who's at the end, put them on the range, took them through tactics, took them through firing, had them experience that. And then, once we got to set, it was all blank fire. So, the question though is now with digital cameras, they don't capture gun bursts really well, especially daytime. So I think we did end up having to add some of those, but the bullets coming out and all that kind of stuff is real.
Yeah. Well, it certainly looked real when I saw it move, because I was thinking, if that's not, if that's not blank fire, and she's doing a hell of a job convincing me it is, because
It's,
pretty good.
it's so funny because now you see a lot of movies and you see how rarely you see a gun actually fire and do the whole mechanic. Like I was watching an Inception and with my son, and in the hotel room fight, like, Joseph Gordon-Levitt grabs for the gun, the guy comes at him, you hear the bang, but you never see the gun, right? You never see the gun fire or anything like that. And especially a lot of stuff with like Navy SEALs, shows and movies and Terminal List, things like that. A lot of that stuff now is airsoft. But with those guys, you get the impression that it's not like, jerking them back, it's like this very tactical, type of thing, which you buy because these guys are sort of trained professionals. I thought the visceral nature of an actual full auto weapon with these actors would be so much more conducive to sort of realism, and the absurdity of it, right, of the movie, than trying to go through with the whole airsoft thing. Like, because I've also had issues with that in the past, where it's like you have to hold it a certain way, you have to get it to do a certain thing. So just having, at the time, I was just like, no, let's do blank fire and let's go for it.
Yeah, it was worth it. It was worth it. It looked good. So what I was going to ask you about was mending the line. So on your Instagram, there is a lot of pictures of you holding fish. So I'm assuming that was a hobby before you did the film, I'm assuming.
It was a hobby before I did the film, and it's what made me want to do the movie and made me feel like I should do the movie.
The right guy to do it. And did you, how did that project come to you? Or did you go after it?
No, that was, considering the material and my love of fly fishing and all that stuff. Ironically, I had nothing to do with it. Like, it came to me, but it came to me haphazardly. And the way it ended up coming to me was, and what's crazy is when you think about it, so a couple years ago or whatever, this came to me in 2021. So I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, my manager produced a movie called Population Zero, which is a mockumentary about the idea that there's a county in Wyoming or in Montana where there's no people, and you can commit a murder there because you can't be tried by a jury of your own peers because there's nobody there. And so the movie took place in Montana, but they didn't shoot it in Montana. But the fact that he produced this and was involved is the sole reason why I ended up being involved in Mending the Line, because Kelly McKendry, who was one of the producers of Mending the Line, she started calling around to people and asking anybody that had made a movie in Montana, what's the process for making a movie in Montana? Because it's not really a film hub. They have a great, incentive, but not a lot of movies get shot up there. So what's the process? So she found this movie and saw it was shot, took place in Montana, and called my manager. And he said, oh, well, we actually shot in Canada, so I can't really tell you what that's like. He said, but what's the movie? And she said, oh, it's about veteran fly fishing, this whole thing. And he knew I was a fly fisher. He's a fly fisherman too. So he knew I was really into fly fishing. And he said, well, do you have a director? She said, no. And he's like, I've got the director for you. Can I send him the script? And he sends me the script and I read it. And I'm like, I have to do this. And I knew immediately. Because beyond the fact that I was interested in fly fishing, I was also had for another unrelated project a couple years before that was about a veteran experiencing PTSD that never got made. I'd done an enormous amount of research into this world. And suddenly I was seeing the combination of these two subjects come together in a way that was really poignant and beautiful, and in a way that I never really could have conceived of, the script by Stephen Camilio. And I was like, it was, you always sort of want the movie and you're always disappointed when you don't get it, when you pitch on it. I was really preparing to be devastated if they hadn't gone with me because, as a fly fisherman and as somebody that had done this research into this, my concern was that they were going to hire, because they look better on paper, they were going to hire a, TV director who would come in and do it and wouldn't have the type of care that I thought was going to be necessary to tell this story accurately and tell it in the way that it needed to be told. Because, if you mess up the fly fishing stuff, you lose that audience. And if you mess up the veteran stuff, you lose that audience, and who's left? You know, you lose those two audiences. Nobody's watching your movie. And I just really wanted to make sure that we did honor, both on the veteran side and what they had gone through and what that process was, but also did honor to the sport of fly fishing and making sure that it was represented well on screen, because it hasn't always been.
Yeah. And did you show them the pictures of you with the fish to prove?
Yeah, they'd seen my Instagram, and when, in fact, when Kelly was telling Steven about it, because of course at the time they're like, oh, he's a magazine writer and he's producing on it. I'm like, great. Like, I have to convince this guy that I'm going to take over his project. But as soon as she said, oh, and he's a fly fisherman, he's like, oh yeah, that's what he says. And then she sent him my Instagram and he saw the Instagram. And he's like, oh, all right. Yeah. This guy actually knows what he's doing.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking maybe a strategy in the future, get AI to put you wherever you need for the particular job. 100 photos of you doing that, maybe you'll get the gig.
Yeah, just wow, this guy's busy. He does everything. He skydives, he mountain climbs, he races cars. He does, exactly.
He's the guy for the job.
But no, it was me.
Yeah, one thing I was going to ask you was Brian Cox, awesome actor. Obviously, he gives off very grumpy energy in whatever he does. He's awesome. Is he like that in real life? Is he give that same energy off in real life?
I mean, a little bit, right? Like, I don't think, he's that far from his character. But the problem was, I knew of Brian. Obviously, I was very familiar with him when we cast him. I was more familiar with him in more of his character roles. I hadn't seen Succession yet. So I was familiar with him from Bourne and even Troy, like just, every, what's the, where he plays Robert McKee, right? Like, just all, Hannibal, obviously, with Michael Mann's Manhunter, so I was very familiar with him in those roles, right? And then I was like, in preparation for shooting, I was like, well, I should watch Succession because he's in it. And then I became very afraid that, like, I sort of got in my head, like, oh, is this actually him? Right. Because, like, he's really, I mean, he turns it up in Succession, and you're just like, man, who is he going to be when I meet him? And turns out he's actually incredibly sweet, really gentle, really, really nice guy. He's up there in age. So that comes with a certain, like, I don't want to deal with bullshit, type of thing. But an incredibly, incredibly nice guy, very, very generous. And was a lovely, lovely person to work with. And really, again, he came in, we had him for 2 weeks, it's not a stunt cast, like, but even at 2 weeks, I'm like, we needed him, to learn how to cast a fly rod. Like, he had to take time before, this wasn't, like a River Runs Through It, where they had like 6 months ahead of the movie to, like, learn how to cast and casting doubles. And, that was a pretty sizable movie. We had a little bit of time to get him up to speed, and he was generous to sort of even show up to do that, and then we had him in the river and lying on rocks and in the rain and lying in a hospital. Actually, the hospital bed was his favorite day, because he was just like hung out in there for the whole day. But really, really great guy, very generous with all the other actors. And is not really quite as gruff as he is in most of his roles.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you'd like to hear from more industry professionals, how they got into the business and how you can do the same, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from movie sets around the world, then please do subscribe to the Honest Filmmaker podcast.